The winter wind howled through the Wyoming plains like a living thing, and Hannah Harper stood shivering in her thin wedding dress outside the Prairie Rose Saloon in San Andreas, wondering if dying from cold might be preferable to what awaited her inside. The dress had been her mother's, yellowed lace that smelled of camphor and broken promises, and it hung loose on her too thin frame. She clutched the carpet bag containing everything she owned in this world, her fingers gone numb despite her desperate grip. The year was 1883, and she had traveled 3 weeks by stage and rail from Philadelphia to marry a man she had never met, a man who had paid her passage with the understanding that she would become his wife. But Joseph Crane had taken one look at her through the saloon window, his face twisting with disgust, before turning his back and ordering another whiskey. That had been 2 hours ago, and Hannah had been standing in the snow ever since, unable to move forward or back, frozen in more ways than one. "You planning on dying out here, miss?" The voice was deep, rough around the edges but not unkind. Hannah turned her head slowly, her neck stiff with cold, to find a man leading a paint horse toward the livery stable across the muddy street. He was tall, broad-shouldered under his heavy coat, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that seemed to catch what little light the overcast sky provided. "I might be," she said, and was surprised her voice still worked. The man stopped, his gloved hand resting on his horse's neck. He studied her for a long moment, taking in the wedding dress, the carpet bag, the way she swayed on her feet. "That is not happening on my watch," he said firmly. He wrapped his horse's reins around a hitching post and crossed the street in long strides. Hannah tried to step back, but her legs would not cooperate. The man shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and draped it around her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming, and she found herself swaying forward into it. "Easy now," he said, steadying her with one hand on her elbow. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday," she managed. "Maybe the day before, I cannot remember." He muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Good. Because I am taking you somewhere warm and you are going to eat something, and then you are going to tell me why you are standing in the snow in a wedding dress." "He does not want me," Hannah heard herself say. "Joseph Crane. He paid for my passage from Philadelphia, but when he saw me, he did not want me." The man's jaw tightened. "Joseph Crane is a mean drunk and a fool. Come on." He guided her down the street, one hand firm on her elbow, and Hannah was too cold and tired to resist. Her feet felt like blocks of ice in her thin boots, and she stumbled more than once, but he kept her upright. They passed the general store, the bank, the blacksmith's forge where warmth radiated out into the cold air. Finally, they stopped in front of a small house at the end of the main street, neat and well kept despite its modest size. "This is my place," he said, pushing open the door. "It is not much, but it is warm and decent." Hannah hesitated on the threshold. "I cannot. People will talk." "Let them talk. You need to get warm and eat something before you collapse. I am not going to let a woman freeze to death because of propriety." He had a point. Hannah let him guide her inside, and the warmth hit her like a physical force. The house was small but clean, with a stone fireplace where embers glowed red. There was a table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner with a quilt folded neatly at its foot, and shelves lined with books and supplies. It spoke of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. "Sit," he said, pulling out one of the chairs. Hannah sat, still wrapped in his coat, and watched as he built up the fire until flames crackled and danced. Then he filled a kettle from a bucket near the door and set it to heat on a hook over the fire. "I am going to make you some coffee," he said. "And I have stew from yesterday that I can heat up. It is not fancy, but it will warm you from the inside." You do not have to do this, Hannah said, but her voice lacked conviction. I know I do not have to, I want to. He paused, then extended his hand. Henry Hopkins. Most folks just call me Henry. Hannah Harper. She took his hand with her numb fingers, and his grip was warm and solid. Well, Miss Harper, you are welcome in my home as long as you need shelter. As the feeling slowly returned to her extremities, bringing with it pins and needles of pain, Hannah found herself studying Henry Hopkins. He moved around his small kitchen with practiced efficiency, spooning stew into a pot and setting it near the fire to heat. He could not have been much past 30, with the weathered face of a man who spent his days outdoors. There was a scar along his jaw, white against tanned skin, and his hands were calloused and strong. "What do you do, Mr. Hopkins?" she asked. "Just Henry, please. I work cattle mostly. I have a small spread about 5 miles outside of town, but I keep this place in San Andreas for the winter months when the work is slower." He poured hot water into a tin cup and added coffee grounds, then handed it to her. "Drink this. It will help." The coffee was strong and bitter, but Hannah wrapped her hands around the cup and felt the warmth seep into her bones. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet. You have not tried my stew." But there was a hint of humor in his voice. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind outside. Hannah sipped her coffee and tried to understand how her life had come to this point. 6 months ago, she had been living in Philadelphia with her aunt and uncle, working as a seamstress to earn her keep. Then her aunt had died, and her uncle had made it clear that she was no longer welcome in his house. She was 21 years old with no prospects and no family who wanted her. The matrimonial advertisement had seemed like a lifeline. Joseph Crane, rancher in San Andreas, Wyoming, seeking a wife. Must be of good character and willing to work. Hannah had written to him, sending the only photograph she had, taken years ago when her mother was still alive. He had written back with a ticket and instructions to arrive on the 15th of December. She had never imagined he would take one look at her and decide she was not worth the price of the ticket. "The stew is ready," Henry said, interrupting her thoughts. He ladled a generous portion into a bowl and set it before her with a spoon. "Eat. You need your strength." The stew was simple, beef and potatoes and carrots, but it was the best thing Hannah had ever tasted. She ate slowly, feeling life return to her body with each bite. Henry sat across from her with his own bowl, eating in companionable silence. When they had both finished, he collected the bowls and set them aside. "Now," he said, settling back in his chair, "tell me what happened." So Hannah told him. She told him about Philadelphia, about her aunt's death and her uncle's rejection. She told him about the advertisement, the letters, the long journey west with hope in her heart. And she told him about standing outside the saloon, watching through the window as Joseph Crane looked at her and turned away. "He said I looked different from my photograph," she said quietly. "Older. Harder. He said he wanted a wife who was pleasing to look at, not some dried-up spinster." Henry's expression darkened. "Joseph Crane is a fool. Perhaps he is right, though. I am not much to look at. I have always been too thin, too plain. My aunt used to say I had the kind of face that would never launch ships or inspire poetry." "Your aunt sounds like she was unkind. She was practical." "No," Henry said firmly. "She was cruel. There is a difference." Hannah looked up, startled by the intensity in his voice. Henry met her gaze steadily, and she felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of shame she had been carrying. "You are cold and tired, and you have been treated badly," Henry continued, "but that does not make you unwanted. It makes the people who treated you that way blind and foolish." "You do not know me," Hannah whispered. "I know you have traveled across the country alone to marry a stranger, which takes courage. I know you were standing in the snow rather than begging to be let into a saloon, which takes pride. And I know that right now you need help and I am going to give it to you." He stood and pulled a blanket from his bed, draping it over her shoulders on top of his coat. "You are going to rest now. The bed is yours tonight. I will sleep in the chair by the fire. I cannot take your bed." "You can and you will. We can argue about it, but you will lose." There was that hint of humor again, softening his words. Hannah was too tired to argue. She let Henry guide her to the bed, and she lay down still wrapped in his coat and the blanket, her head sinking into a pillow that smelled of soap and sunshine. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was Henry settling into the chair by the fire, his long legs stretched out before him, keeping watch. When Hannah woke, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the window, and she could hear the sounds of someone moving around the room. She sat up slowly, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day came rushing back. "Good morning," Henry said. He was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pan. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Hannah admitted. "Warmer. Good, I am making eggs. I hope you like them." Hannah pushed back the blankets and stood, smoothing down her wrinkled wedding dress. She felt awkward and out of place, a burden on a man who had shown her nothing but kindness. "Mr. Hopkins, Henry, I need to figure out what I am going to do. I cannot impose on your hospitality indefinitely." "You are not imposing, and we will figure something out after you eat." He slid eggs onto 2 plates and set them on the table. "Sit." Over breakfast, Henry laid out the situation with characteristic bluntness. San Andreas is not a big town, and opportunities for women are limited. The school already has a teacher, and the doctor's wife handles the nursing. There is work at the saloon, but I would not recommend it. "I can sew," Hannah offered. "I worked as a seamstress in Philadelphia." "That is good." Martha Chen, who runs the laundry and mending service, has been looking for help. Her arthritis has been getting worse. I can take you to meet her this morning if you like." "Thank you, and I will need to find somewhere to stay. Is there a boarding house in town?" Henry was quiet for a moment. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "There is, but it is run by Clara Peterson, and she is particular about who she takes in. A woman who came west to marry and got rejected might not meet her standards." Hannah felt her cheeks burn with shame. Of course. She should have realized that her situation would make her unmarriageable, unemployable, unwanted in every way that mattered. "However," Henry continued, as if he had not noticed her distress, "I have a proposition for you. Before you say no, just hear me out." Hannah nodded, unable to trust her voice. "This house sits empty most of the year while I am out at my ranch. It is a waste, and I have been thinking about taking on a housekeeper, someone to maintain the place, and maybe do some cooking and mending for me when I am in town. The job would come with room and board, and I would pay you a small wage as well. It would give you time to establish yourself, make connections, figure out what you want to do." "You are offering me a job as your housekeeper," Hannah said slowly. "I am. I know it is not what you came west for, but it would give you a place to stay and a respectable position. And before you worry, I would still spend most of my time at the ranch. You would have the house to yourself most days." It was more than generous. It was a lifeline when she was drowning. But Hannah hesitated, thinking of propriety, of what people would say. Then she thought of standing in the snow in her wedding dress, of Joseph Crane's disgusted face, of having nowhere else to go. "I accept," she said quietly. "Thank you, Henry. I will work hard, I promise. I will earn my keep." "I have no doubt about that." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. "Now, let us go see Martha Chen about that sewing work. The more you have to occupy yourself, the better." San Andreas was bustling despite the cold. with people going about their business bundled in heavy coats and scarves. Henry walked beside Hannah, nodding greetings to people they passed. She was acutely aware of the curious looks directed her way, and she kept her head high despite her embarrassment. Martha Chen's establishment was a neat building near the edge of town, with steam rising from vents in the roof. Martha herself was a small woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes were kind when Henry made the introductions. "So you are the one Joseph Crane rejected," Martha said bluntly, looking Hannah up and down. "Good. Any woman that man finds wanting is probably worth knowing." Hannah felt a surprised laugh bubble up in her throat. "Thank you, I think. Henry says you can sew. Show me your hands." Hannah held out her hands, and Martha examined them with the same thoroughness she might give to a piece of fabric. "Seamstress hands," she pronounced. "Good. I have more work than I can handle, especially with the holidays coming. Can you start today?" "Yes, absolutely." "Good. I pay 20 cents for every garment mended, more for alterations and new pieces. You can work here or take items home, whatever suits you." Martha moved to a table piled high with clothing. "This is my backlog. Start with the simple mending and we will see how you do." Hannah spent the rest of the morning bent over torn shirts and hemming trousers, her fingers moving with the practiced ease of years of experience. It felt good to be working, to be useful, to be doing something other than worrying about her situation. Martha worked beside her, and they fell into an easy rhythm, with Martha occasionally offering advice or approval. At noon, Henry returned to walk Hannah back to his house. "How did it go?" he asked. "Well, I think. Martha seems pleased with my work. Martha does not suffer fools or poor craftsmanship. If she is pleased, it means you are good." They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments before Henry spoke again. "I need to head out to the ranch tomorrow morning. I will be gone for a few days, checking on the cattle and making sure everything is secure for the winter. Will you be all right here on your own?" "Of course. I am not a child, Henry. I know that, but you have had a difficult few days and I wanted to make sure." There was something in his voice, a concern that went beyond mere politeness, and Hannah found herself glancing at him curiously. Henry Hopkins was proving to be unlike any man she had ever met. He was gruff and straightforward, but there was a kindness in him that seemed bone deep, genuine in a way that surprised her. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Henry showed Hannah where everything was in the house, how to work the stove, where he kept his supplies. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Hannah mending clothes from Martha while Henry read or worked on repairing tack and tools. They talked, sharing stories of their lives, and Hannah found herself relaxing in his presence in a way she had never relaxed around anyone. She learned that Henry had come west 10 years ago from Missouri, following a dream of having his own land. He had worked as a ranch hand for years, saving every penny, until he had enough to buy his small spread. It was not much, he said, just 100 acres and a couple dozen head of cattle, but it was his. "Do you ever get lonely out there?" Hannah asked one evening. Henry looked up from the bridle he was mending. "Sometimes," he admitted. "It is a hard life ranching alone. But I have always preferred my own company to bad company, and I have not found anyone worth sharing the work with." "What about a wife? You must have thought about marrying." "I have thought about it, but ranching is not an easy life, especially out here. It would not be fair to ask a woman to share the hardship unless she truly wanted it." He paused, his eyes on the fire. "And I have never met a woman who wanted me and the life I could offer." There was a loneliness in his voice that made Hannah's chest ache. "I think you are wrong," she said quietly. "I think you would be easy to want, Henry Hopkins." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Then Henry cleared his throat and went back to his work, but Hannah noticed that his hands were not quite steady. True to his word, Henry left for his ranch the next morning. Hannah stood in the doorway and watched him ride away on his paint horse, feeling strangely bereft. But she threw herself into work, cleaning the house from top to bottom, doing laundry and spending her afternoons at Martha's, sewing until her fingers ached. The days passed, and Hannah began to feel almost settled. Martha was good company, sharp-tongued but fair, and she introduced Hannah to other women in town. There was Sarah Miller, who ran the general store with her husband, and Elizabeth Foster, the banker's wife, who organized the church socials. They were curious about Hannah, about why she had come west and what her plans were, but they were not unkind. It was Sarah who first mentioned the Christmas dance. "We have one every year," she explained as Hannah shopped for thread. "Everyone in town comes. You should attend, Hannah. It would be good for you to socialize more." "I am not sure that is a good idea," Hannah said hesitantly, "given my situation." "Your situation is that Joseph Crane is a fool and everyone knows it. You have done nothing wrong. Come to the dance. Martha will be there, and Elizabeth, and I expect Henry Hopkins will make an appearance if someone drags him into town." Hannah felt her cheeks warm at the mention of Henry's name. "I do not know if Henry likes dances." Sarah gave her a knowing look. "Henry does not like much of anything social, but he is a good man. He will come if he thinks you need an escort." Henry returned from his ranch on a cold Friday afternoon, snow dusting his coat and hat. Hannah heard the horse outside and rushed to open the door, then stopped herself, suddenly shy. What if her eagerness betrayed feelings she was not ready to name? But Henry pushed open the door with his usual lack of ceremony, stamping snow from his boots. "It is colder than a witch's heart out there," he announced, then stopped when he saw Hannah. "You cleaned." "I have been earning my keep," she said, pleased that he had noticed. "There is stew on the stove, and I made bread this morning. You are going to spoil me." He shed his coat and gloves, moving toward the fire with a grateful sigh. "It is good to be back." They ate dinner together, and Hannah told him about her week, about the work she was doing for Martha, and the women she had met. Henry listened attentively, asking questions, seeming genuinely interested in her life. It felt domestic and comfortable, and Hannah found herself thinking dangerous thoughts about what it might be like if this were permanent, if she had the right to care for Henry and his home not as an employee, but as something more. "Sarah Miller mentioned the Christmas dance," she said, stirring her stew. "She said everyone in town goes." "Sarah Miller is a busybody who cannot stand to see anyone have a quiet evening," Henry said, but there was affection in his voice. "Do you want to go?" "I do not know. I have never been much for dances, and I worry about what people will say about my situation." "Hannah, look at me." She raised her eyes to his. "You have done nothing wrong. You came west in good faith to marry a man who was not worthy of you. That is his failing, not yours. Anyone who judges you for that is not worth your concern." He paused. "I would be honored to escort you to the dance if you would like to attend. You do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to, I want to, unless you would prefer to go with someone else." "No," Hannah said quickly. "I would like to go with you if you are sure." "I am sure." Henry smiled, and Hannah felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. The dance was held in the church hall, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the assembled crowd. Hannah wore the best dress she had, a simple green wool that Martha had helped her alter, and she had pinned up her dark hair with care. Henry had cleaned up as well, trading his usual work clothes for dark trousers and a clean white shirt under his coat. He looked handsome and nervous, and Hannah found it endearing that this confident man could be made uncertain by something as simple as a dance. "You look beautiful," he said when he came to collect her, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They walked to the church together, Henry offering his arm, and Hannah felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way her heart sped up when he looked at her. The hall was already crowded when they arrived, filled with families and couples and the sound of fiddle music. Sarah Miller spotted them immediately and hurried over, her round face beaming. "Hannah, Henry, I am so glad you came. Hannah, you must meet my husband James, and there is punch and cake, and oh, the music is wonderful this year." Sarah whisked Hannah away to meet people, and Hannah found herself passed from introduction to introduction, trying to remember names and faces. Everyone was friendly, curious about her but not unkind. She saw Joseph Crane across the room at one point, drunk and surly, and she was grateful when Henry appeared at her elbow, a solid presence between her and her failed betrothed. "Would you like to dance?" Henry asked. "I am not very good at it," Hannah admitted. "Neither am I. We can be terrible together." He led her onto the floor as a waltz started, and Hannah placed her hand in his, feeling his other hand settle on her waist. They started to move, and it was awkward at first, both of them stiff and self-conscious. But gradually they found their rhythm, and Hannah relaxed into the dance, into the feeling of being led by someone strong and sure. "You are better at this than you claimed," she said, looking up at him. "I may have practiced a little years ago. My mother insisted I learn before I left Missouri." He spun her gently, and Hannah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. They danced several more times that evening, and in between, Henry stayed by her side, fetching her punch, introducing her to ranchers and cowboys he knew. Hannah felt protected and valued, feelings that were new and precious. As the evening wore on, she noticed Joseph Crane watching them, his expression dark with anger and something that might have been regret. Let him regret, Hannah thought fiercely. Let him see what he rejected and know that he was wrong, but mostly she tried not to think about Joseph Crane at all. She focused on Henry, on the way he smiled at her, on the way his hand felt in hers, on the way her heart seemed to expand every time he looked at her with those steady, kind eyes. They walked home through the snow, the night crisp and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Hannah's cheeks hurt from smiling, and she felt giddy with happiness, with the simple joy of having had a good evening in good company. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they reached Henry's house. "I had a wonderful time. So did I." Henry helped her up the steps, then hesitated at the door. "Hannah, I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" "When I brought you here that first day, it was because you needed help and I could not walk away from someone in need. But these past few weeks, having you here, getting to know you, it has become more than that." He took a breath, his words coming faster now. "You are smart and strong and brave, and you make this house feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep. I find myself thinking about you when I am at the ranch, wondering what you are doing, looking forward to coming back to town just so I can see you. And tonight, dancing with you, I realized that I am falling in love with you, Hannah Harper." Hannah stared at him, her mind racing. She thought about the past few weeks, about how safe she felt with Henry, how right it seemed to cook his meals and mend his clothes, how much she looked forward to their evenings by the fire. She thought about how her heart lifted when he walked through the door, how she had started measuring her days by whether or not she would see him. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I have been for a while now, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself." "Why were you afraid?" "Because I am supposed to be unwanted. I came here to marry one man who rejected me, and now here you are, saying you want me completely. It seems too good to be true." Henry reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "You are not unwanted, Hannah. Not to me. You are everything I did not know I needed. You are wanted, completely and absolutely, just as you are." Then he kissed her, soft and sweet, and Hannah felt something break open inside her, all the hurt and loneliness of the past months cracking apart to make room for something new and bright and full of hope. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not because you need someone to take care of you, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Marry me, Hannah." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you, Henry Hopkins." They were married 3 weeks later on a cold January morning in the small church in San Andreas. Martha Chen stood up as Hannah's witness, and one of Henry's ranch hand friends, a man named Pete Douglas, stood up for him. It was a small ceremony, nothing like the grand wedding Hannah had once imagined as a girl, but it was perfect because it was real and because the man standing beside her loved her truly. Hannah wore a new dress, pale blue wool that she had sewn herself, and Henry wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut, his eyes shining with happiness. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed her with such tenderness that Hannah felt tears slip down her cheeks. Afterward, there was a small celebration at the church hall, with cake and coffee and well wishes from their friends. Sarah Miller cried happy tears, and Martha gave Hannah a fierce hug. Even Joseph Crane sent a gift, a set of kitchen towels, which Hannah suspected was his way of apologizing without having to admit he had been wrong. That night, Hannah and Henry returned to their house, now truly theirs together. Henry carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in front of the fire. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hopkins," he said. "It already feels like home," Hannah replied, reaching up to touch his face. "You made it feel like home from that very first night." They stood together in the firelight, holding each other, and Hannah marveled at how much her life had changed. 2 months ago, she had been shivering in the snow, convinced she was unwanted and alone. Now she was married to a good man who loved her, who saw her worth when others had dismissed her. That winter was hard, as Wyoming winters always were, but Hannah was warm and content. She divided her time between keeping house and continuing her sewing work for Martha, and Henry came to town more often than he had in previous winters, reluctant to be away from his new wife for long. In the spring, Hannah moved out to the ranch with Henry, and she fell in love with the land as she had fallen in love with the man. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, rolling plains stretching to distant mountains, big sky overhead. The ranch house was small but sturdy, and Hannah set about making it a home, sewing curtains and quilts, planting a garden, tending to the chickens Henry had bought her as a gift. Life was not easy. Ranching was hard work, from dawn to dusk, and there were setbacks and struggles. But they faced everything together, and Hannah discovered that she was stronger than she had ever known. She learned to ride, to help with the cattle, to shoot a rifle when necessary. She learned the rhythm of the seasons, the satisfaction of honest work, the deep joy of building a life with someone who valued her completely. In the fall of 1884, Hannah realized she was pregnant. She told Henry one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and his face lit up with such pure happiness that she knew she would remember that moment for the rest of her life. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" "Happy." "Hannah, I am over the moon. You have already given me so much, and now this." He pulled her close, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You are amazing." The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah was sick in the mornings and exhausted by afternoon, and as winter came on again, she grew large and uncomfortable. But Henry was attentive and patient, taking over more of the housework, insisting she rest, worrying over her constantly. Their son was born in early March of 1885, on a night when snow was falling soft and steady outside. Martha Chen had come to help with the birth, and she was a calm, competent presence as Hannah labored through the long hours. Henry paced the main room of the house, occasionally sticking his head in to check on her, his face tight with worry when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect. Martha cleaned him up and placed him in Hannah's arms. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy." Henry came in then, his eyes wide, and knelt beside the bed to look at his son. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Hannah, he is perfect." "He has your eyes," Hannah said, tracing the baby's tiny features. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but now, looking at their son, only one seemed right. "James," Henry said. "After my father, James Henry Hopkins." "James," Hannah repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, James." Being a mother was harder than anything Hannah had ever done, but it was also the most rewarding. James was a fussy baby who did not sleep well, and there were many nights when Hannah walked the floor with him, exhausted and frustrated and wondering if she was doing anything right. But Henry was a devoted father, taking turns with the nighttime wakings, singing to James in his deep, rough voice, marveling at every milestone. As James grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch grew as well. Henry was a smart, careful rancher, and his herd increased steadily. He hired on a couple of hands to help with the work, young men who lived in the bunkhouse and took their meals with the family. Hannah found that she enjoyed the bustle of having people around, the conversation and laughter that filled the house. In the spring of 1887, when James was 2, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she worked almost up until her due date, though Henry fretted constantly. Their daughter was born in October, a tiny thing with a cap of dark hair and a surprisingly loud voice. They named her Ruth, after Hannah's mother, and James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Life settled into a new rhythm, busy and full and sometimes chaotic, but always rich with love. Hannah often thought back to that night she had stood shivering in the snow, convinced she was unwanted, and marveled at how wrong she had been. She was wanted desperately, completely, by a man who showed her every day through his words and actions that she was valued. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their family. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the animals. Ruth was wild and fearless, always getting into mischief, keeping her parents on their toes. In 1890, they had another son, Samuel, and in 1893, another daughter, Grace. The ranch prospered, growing from a small operation to something more substantial. Henry built a new, larger house, with separate bedrooms for the children and a proper kitchen that Hannah had dreamed of. They bought more land, expanded the herd, and became known throughout Wyoming as fair dealers and hard workers. But through all the changes and growth, what Hannah treasured most was the quiet moments with Henry. The evenings when the children were in bed and they would sit on the porch, watching the stars come out, his hand in hers. The mornings when she would wake to find him watching her, love clear in his eyes. The way he still, after all these years, told her she was beautiful, wanted, completely his. In the summer of 1895, Martha Chen passed away in her sleep, and Hannah grieved deeply for the woman who had given her a chance when others might not have. They buried her in the cemetery outside San Andreas, and Henry held Hannah as she cried, understanding that Martha had been more than an employer. She had been a friend when Hannah desperately needed one. Life was not without its struggles. There were droughts and harsh winters, illnesses that frightened them, accidents that could have been worse. But they faced everything together, and Hannah came to understand that this was what marriage truly was, not the romantic fantasy she had once imagined, but the reality of two people choosing each other every day, working together, supporting each other through whatever came. By 1900, James was 15 and already taller than his father. Ruth was 13 and as stubborn as a mule. Samuel was 10 and always had his nose in a book. And Grace was 7 and had everyone wrapped around her little finger. The house was noisy and messy and wonderful, and Hannah could not imagine her life any other way. One evening in late spring, after the children had gone to bed, Hannah and Henry sat on the porch as they often did. Henry had his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, comfortable and content. "You ever think about that night I found you?" Henry asked quietly. "Standing in the snow in your wedding dress." "Sometimes," Hannah admitted. "It feels like a different lifetime, almost like it happened to someone else. I think about it often. I thank God for that night, for the snow and the cold, and even for Joseph Crane's cruelty, because it brought you to me." Hannah turned to look at him. "I used to think I was unwanted. My aunt told me I was plain and difficult. Joseph Crane took one look at me and turned away. I believed them. I believed I was not worth wanting. And now I know the truth. I was always worth wanting, they just could not see it. But you saw it, Henry. From that very first night you saw me, really saw me, and you wanted me completely." She reached up to touch his face, weathered now with years but still dear to her. "You saved my life that night, but you also gave me a life worth living. You gave me a home, a family, a place to belong. You gave me love, real and true and lasting." Henry caught her hand and kissed her palm. "You gave me all those things too. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch, existing but not really living. You brought light and warmth and joy into my life. You made me understand what it means to truly love someone." They sat in silence for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the land they had built together. The ranch stretched before them, prosperous and well-kept, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. But more than that, it was home, filled with memories and laughter and love. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Hannah asked. "You said I was not going to die on your watch." "I remember. You have been keeping that promise every day since. You have kept me safe and warm and loved, not just on that one night, but every night after. It has been my privilege and my pleasure." Henry pulled her closer, and they sat together as the stars came out, one by one, bright against the darkening sky. In the years that followed, the children grew and started making their own ways in the world. James took over more of the ranch work, showing the same dedication and integrity his father had always demonstrated. Ruth, to everyone's surprise, showed an aptitude for business and began helping manage the ranch's finances. Samuel went off to college in the East, determined to become a lawyer, and Grace showed signs of being an artist, always drawing and painting the beautiful Wyoming landscape. Henry and Hannah grew older together, their hair graying, their movements slower, but their love as strong as ever. They became grandparents, first when James married a girl from town and had a son, then when Ruth married and had twin daughters. The house that had once been full of their own children now filled with grandchildren during holidays and visits, and Hannah delighted in the noise and chaos. On their 20th wedding anniversary, in January of 1905, Henry gave Hannah a gift. It was a painting, commissioned from Grace, showing the main street of San Andreas as it had looked that winter night in 1883, with a small figure in a white dress standing in the snow and a man on a paint horse approaching. "So we never forget where we started," Henry said as Hannah stared at the painting with tears in her eyes. "I could never forget," she whispered. "That night changed everything." "That night I found my home," Henry said. "Not the house, not the land, but you. You have been my home for 20 years, Hannah Hopkins, and I love you more today than I did then." "I love you too," Hannah said, setting aside the painting to embrace her husband. "Thank you for wanting me when I could not see my own worth. Thank you for showing me that I was not unwanted but precious beyond measure." They held each other in the quiet house, and Hannah thought about all the years stretching behind them, full of joy and struggle, laughter and tears, the everyday moments that made up a life. She thought about the scared, rejected girl she had been, standing in the snow with nowhere to go and no one who wanted her. And she thought about the woman she had become, strong and confident and deeply loved. It had all started with a cowboy who could not walk past someone in need, who had offered his coat and his home and eventually his heart. Henry had sheltered her from the cold that night, but he had done so much more than that. He had given her warmth, not just physical but emotional and spiritual, a warmth that had sustained her through everything the years had brought. As winter gave way to spring in 1905, Hannah found herself reflecting on the passage of time. She was 43 years old now, and Henry was 53, and sometimes she could not quite believe how quickly the years had passed. But every morning when she woke beside her husband, every evening when their family gathered around the table, she felt grateful for the life they had built together. The ranch continued to prosper, and they began making plans to hand over more of the daily operations to James and his family. Henry was not ready to retire completely. He would never be the kind of man who could sit idle, but he was ready to slow down, to spend more time with Hannah, to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. In the summer of 1905, they took a trip, just the two of them, traveling by train to Denver and staying in a fine hotel. It was Hannah's first real vacation, and she delighted in everything: the busy city streets, the restaurants, the theater. But her favorite moments were still the quiet ones, sitting with Henry in their hotel room, looking out over the city, talking about everything and nothing. "If you could go back and change anything," Henry asked her one evening, "would you?" Hannah considered the question seriously. "If I could change things, I suppose I would have spared myself the pain of my aunt's unkindness or Joseph Crane's rejection. But those experiences brought me to you, so no, I would not change a thing. Every difficulty I faced led me to this life, to you, and I would not trade that for anything. Even the years of hard work, the struggles we have faced, especially those, they made us who we are. They taught us what we are capable of together." She smiled at him. "What about you? Any regrets?" "Only that I did not find you sooner. I wish I could have spared you those years of feeling unwanted." Henry took her hand. "But I am grateful for every moment we have had, and I look forward to every moment still to come." They returned to the ranch refreshed and ready for the next chapter of their lives. As promised, they began gradually stepping back from the day-to-day operations, though Henry still rode out to check on the cattle most days, and Hannah still kept the household running smoothly. The children continued to grow and change. Samuel graduated from college and returned to Wyoming to practice law, settling in Cheyenne but visiting the ranch often. Grace's art began attracting attention, and she had several pieces displayed in galleries in Denver and San Francisco. James and his wife had 2 more children, and Ruth and her husband welcomed another son. Through it all, Hannah and Henry remained the center of the family, the foundation on which everything else was built. Their love story became family legend, told and retold to the grandchildren, about how Grandma Hannah had come west to marry another man. But Grandpa Henry had found her in the snow and known immediately that she was meant to be his. In the spring of 1910, on a bright April morning, Hannah and Henry rode out together to the far pasture where they had first built the original ranch house, now used as storage. The land was green with new grass, and wildflowers dotted the hills. They dismounted and stood together, looking out over everything they had built. 27 years, Hannah said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like a lifetime ago. The best 27 years of my life, Henry replied. He pulled her close, and they stood together in the sunshine. You know what I remember most about that first night? What? The way you said you were unwanted, and I knew immediately that it was a lie. I knew, standing there in the snow, that you were exactly what I had been waiting for, even though I had not known I was waiting. He turned her to face him. You were wanted from the very first moment, Hannah. Wanted completely, desperately, with everything I am. And you gave me that, Hannah said, blinking back tears. You gave me everything I did not even know I needed. A home, a family, a purpose, but most of all, love. Real, lasting, genuine love. They kissed there in the spring sunshine. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, and in the distance, cattle lowed contentedly. By 1915, Henry and Hannah were fully retired from active ranch work, though they still lived on the property in the big house. James and his family had built their own house nearby, and the ranch was now officially Hopkins and Son, a thriving operation known throughout Wyoming. Samuel had become a respected lawyer in Cheyenne, serving in the state legislature. Ruth and her husband owned a successful mercantile business. Grace had married an artist she met in Denver, and they divided their time between Colorado and San Andreas. The grandchildren were numerous now, 10 in total, ranging from young adults to small children, and they all adored their grandparents. Hannah loved having them visit, loved the way the house came alive with their energy and laughter. But she also treasured the quiet times, just her and Henry, sitting on the porch in the evening or reading together by the fire. As the years passed, Hannah watched Henry slow down, his strong body finally showing the effects of decades of hard physical labor. His hands, once so sure and steady, developed tremors. His steps became more careful, measured. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Hannah never wavered. In turn, Hannah found her own strength waning. Her eyesight dimmed, making her beloved sewing more difficult. Her joints ached in the cold, but she had her family around her, and most importantly, she had Henry, still by her side after all these years. On a cold December evening in 1916, as snow fell soft and silent outside, Hannah and Henry sat by the fire in their bedroom, bundled in quilts. They had been married 31 years, and Hannah was 54, Henry 64. You remember the Christmas dance? Hannah asked, her voice soft with memory. Our first dance together. I remember everything about that night, Henry replied. The way you looked in that green dress, the way you laughed when I spun you around, the way my heart felt like it might burst when you smiled at me. I knew that night that I loved you. I was too scared to admit it, even to myself, but I knew. I knew it too. I think I knew from the very beginning, from that first night in the snow. I just needed time to understand it, to believe that something so good could really be happening to me. Hannah reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. We have been blessed, Henry, truly blessed. We have built a good life, Henry agreed. A life worth living, and we did it together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance and flicker, lost in their memories and their love for each other. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside they were warm and safe, sheltered from the cold just as they had been that very first night so many years ago. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of seasons and the milestones of their growing family. More grandchildren were born, and then great-grandchildren, and the Hopkins name became synonymous with integrity and hard work throughout Wyoming. Hannah and Henry aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They rarely spoke of the early days anymore, but those memories were always there, a foundation on which everything else was built. The scared young woman in the snow and the cowboy who could not walk past someone in need had become something more, something lasting and beautiful. In the spring of 1920, as the world emerged from the shadow of the Great War and the terrible flu pandemic that had followed, Hannah and Henry celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at the ranch, 3 generations strong, to honor the couple whose love had created this legacy. James, now 35 and graying at the temples, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us what love really means." Not just the easy romance of the early days, though they had that too, but the daily choice to commit to each other, to work together, to build something lasting. They have shown us that real love is not about finding the perfect person, but about choosing to love an imperfect person perfectly. To mother and father, to grandma and grandpa, echoed the voices of children and grandchildren. Hannah looked around the room at all these faces, all these lives that existed because a cowboy had stopped to help a shivering bride in the snow. Her heart swelled with gratitude and love, and when she met Henry's eyes across the table, she saw the same emotion reflected there. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Hannah and Henry sat once more on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the spring chill. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars that had watched over them for 35 years. "Thank you," Hannah said softly. "For what?" "For wanting me when I thought I was unwanted. For seeing worth in me when others saw none. For giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams." Henry pulled her closer. "Thank you for trusting me enough to say yes, for building this life with me, for loving me all these years." "It was easy to love you," Hannah said. "The easiest thing I have ever done." They sat together under the stars, 2 souls who had found each other in the cold and created warmth that would last generations. The wind whispered through the Wyoming plains, carrying stories of love and redemption, of a woman who thought she was unwanted and the man who wanted her completely, absolutely, forever. As they finally rose to go inside, Hannah paused and looked back at the land they had built their life on. She thought about that frightened girl in the wedding dress, convinced she had no value, no future. And she thought about all the years that had followed, full of love and work and family and joy. "I am wanted," she whispered into the night, and it was a statement of fact, a truth that had been proven over and over again for 35 years. Henry heard her and smiled, wrapping his arm around her waist. "You are wanted completely," he said firmly. "You always have been, and you always will be." They walked inside together, closing the door against the cold night, but carrying with them the warmth they had created, a warmth that had started on a snowy December night in 1883 and had never once dimmed. It was a warmth born of love freely given and gratefully received, of 2 people who had chosen each other and continued choosing each other every single day. And in the years that followed, even as their bodies grew frail and their time together drew to its natural close, that warmth never faded. It sustained them through everything, just as it had from the very beginning. Because some loves are not diminished by time, some loves only grow stronger, deeper, more essential, until they become as much a part of you as breathing. Hannah and Henry Hopkins lived out their days surrounded by the family their love had created, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious, something worth holding onto with everything they had. And when, in time, they passed from this world, they did so knowing that their love would live on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. But that was still years in the future. For now, on this spring night in 1920, they were simply Hannah and Henry, husband and wife, best friends, partners in all things, still as much in love as they had been on that December night when a cowboy sheltered a shivering bride from the cold and discovered that she was exactly what he had been looking for all along. She had said she was unwanted, but he had wanted her completely, and in wanting her, he had given her everything,